Good morning, scholars of Global Leadership Academy. Today is week 5 of virtual learning. And today we will be starting with the affirmation. I feel good about myself. I feel good about the people around me. I feel goodness all around me. And it will follow me for the rest of my life because I walk with good and I talk with good and I am good. And that feels real good. Good, better, best. Never let it rest until your good is your better and your better is your best. So the norms for virtual learning: be on time, frame your camera correctly. We should be able to see your face in the camera. Be mindful that your camera picks up the surrounding areas around you. Number 2, mute yourself when not speaking. Number 3, your camera should be on, wear school appropriate clothing. Number 4, pay attention, take notes. Number 5, stay on task. The jewel of the month is citizenship. Citizenship is the position or status of being a citizen of a particular country. The quote of the day: citizenship is the chance to make a difference to the place where you belong. So you will write 5 to 7 sentences and explain what this means to you. If you need to pause, please take the time to pause, but we'll be moving forward into the lesson. The standard for this week is to cite specific textual evidence to support analysis of primary and secondary sources. The objective: so by the end of the week on Friday, you should be able to write 5 to 7 sentences explaining how the court ruled in the case of Brown versus Board of Education by using the link provided in the PowerPoint. The link that will be provided will be the next slide. So I will read this question one more time because at the end of the lesson and by Friday, you should be able to write 5 to 7 sentences explaining how the court ruled in the case of Brown versus Board of Education by using the link provided in the PowerPoint. And here is the link to the Organized Struggle for Equality, where we will be talking about the Brown versus Board of Education, the Plessy versus Ferguson, the NAACP, SNCC, CORE, a lot of different groups and a lot of different things and people and organizations that help during the struggle for equality. Now we will begin. The NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, led desegregation campaigns. Thurgood Marshall was a law student who also attended Lincoln University. He dedicated his life to fighting racism for schools, and he won 29 out of 32 cases as a Black man during segregation. The Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka. 8-year-old Linda Brown was denied entry to an all-white school right next to her house. The Supreme Court said segregation is unconstitutional, and it violated the 14th Amendment. The Chief Justice was Earl Warren. Reaction: the people of Georgia would not comply with the decision of the court. In 1955, Brown II equals desegregation implemented immediately. In Arkansas's Little Rock 9 in 1957, the governor, Orville Faubus, for segregation, he ordered National Guard to keep them out. The NAACP was involved in the school, Central High School. Eisenhower reacted. He had National Guard under federal control and sent them there he sent them to the school to sit with the young lady to attend classes. The school, Central High School, closed down. In 1957, the Civil Rights Act gave Attorney General more power over school desegregation, federal government jurisdiction over violation of voting rights for African Americans. The Montgomery bus boycott happened in December 1955. Rosa Parks was a seamstress who rode the bus every day. She did not feel like going to the back of the bus where colored people were supposed to sit at. So she decided that it was time for a change, and she just had to sit down and maybe something would stir up. She was an NAACP officer. She took a seat in the front row where the white people were and did not move to the colored section. The bus was filled and she refused to move, so she was arrested. She did not want to stand after a long day, so she just sat down. The bus boycott, Montgomery, Alabama, 381 days after the Rosa Parks situation. Martin Luther King Jr. led the group. He was 26 years old, and this is where Martin Luther King got his name. Not necessarily got his name, but this is where his journey of being the spokesperson for Black people began. In 1956, the Supreme Court outlawed bus segregation. Martin Luther King Jr. movement. Martin Luther King believed in nonviolence, which was also called soul force, civil disobedience, the refusal to obey an unjust law, massive demonstrations, and the SCLC, which was a really well-known group, was the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. They carried out nonviolent crusades, protests, and demonstrations. This group was based from a church, as you can see in the name, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. SNCC, or SNCC, stood for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. This was founded from an HBCU in North Carolina, Raleigh, North Carolina to be exact, called Shaw University. This was a national protest group, and these groups would get together and protest the different concerns that the school students or the community had within the community of North Carolina, which was prejudiced at the time. The demonstrations, the Congress of Racial Equality, the CORE. CORE was a real big group back in these times, and that stood for Congress of Racial Equality. Sit-ins. Sit-ins, people sat at segregated lunch counters. A real famous place that people would sit in was called Woolworth, which was like a family store, a dining place, and they just refused to leave. They were getting milkshakes poured on them, spit at, kicked at, a lot of violent things. They got beat, and they were only students. They were young, and they did not respond back. They did not retaliate to the abuse that was given to them. The Freedom Riders of 1961, Alabama. White racists attacked buses, smashed windows, fire bombs. Kennedy was the president. 400 United States Marshals sent to protect the riders. They were banned segregation in all interstate travel facilities. In Ole Miss, September 1962, University of Mississippi was all white. James Meredith was an African American who won a court case that allowed him to enroll. Governor James Barnett refused to let him register. He said, "We will never surrender." Kennedy ordered the marshals to escort him to register. There was a campus riot. There were multiple campus riots that resulted in 2 deaths and thousands of soldiers. 200 people were arrested, and it lasted for 15 hours. In the end, he kept attending University of Mississippi. And mind you, this is in the time where Mississippi was down south, and the prejudice and the racism. That's a real big and bold move, and took a lot of courage. And he did it not only for himself, he did it for the future generations, for us to attend the higher up educational realms of schools. Even though we did have our own schools that were very prestigious, like the Lincolns and the Howards and the different HBCUs that are well known now. So in 1963, Birmingham was the most segregated city. There was a lot of demonstrations. On May 2nd, 1,000 plus African American children marched. 959 were arrested. On May 3rd, there was a second children's crusade. There were fire hoses, attack dogs. Police officers were beating African Americans with clubs, and it was on national television. This was what finally ended segregation in the eyes of the real world, but we all know that there is still segregation all over the world. Kennedy takes a stand. In 1963, Kennedy outraged. He sent troops. Governor George Wallace forced to desegregate University of Alabama. The Civil Rights Bill was equal access to all public accommodations, bathrooms, water fountains, things of that nature. Attorney General power to file school desegregation suits. The March on Washington, where a lot of people, we know about the Million Man March and the I Have a Dream speech by Dr. Martin Luther King, was from the Washington Monument to the Lincoln Memorial. It was on August 28th, 1963, 250,000 plus people. 75,000 were white. Voting. So you had the Freedom Summer, the Selma Campaign and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Freedom Summer, college students who resisted nonviolently. They were registered voters, and the KKK or the Ku Klux Klans were murderers, destructors of homes and businesses. The Selma Campaign, protesters to Montgomery, 600 plus people. The police were there with their whips, their clubs, and tear gas. Johnson sends Congress a bill immediately. In the Voting Rights Act of 1965 eliminated literacy tests. Federal examiners could enroll those who were denied. So they had a literacy test because they knew that African Americans were not getting the same education as the Europeans. Hence the fact that we were not allowed to attend the schools that the white people attended. The white people had the good books and all the technology that they needed to advance themselves, and we had the leftovers with inaccurate information and the worn down and torn down copies of things. So once again, our objective for this week is to say that I can write 5 to 7 sentences explaining how the court ruled in the case of Brown versus Board of Education by using the link provided in the PowerPoint. And our exit ticket questions will be, what issue was brought before the Supreme Court in the case of Brown versus Board of Education? Remember, this information is in the PowerPoint and on the link that was attached to the PowerPoint. So make sure that you copy and paste it into the browser so that you can answer. Number 2, how did the court rule in the case of Brown versus Board of Education? And number 3, why did African American boycott city buses in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955 and 1966? Thank you for everything, and thank you for attending, and have a great day on purpose.